Greetings, this is John Delancey, and you are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net.
What the hell are you?
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch! Who are you to stand up against me? Vandal Savage, destroyer of empire!
Leonard Snart, robber of ATM!
I've worked with a lot of wisecrackers, but you are despicable. This is the last time I work with someone with a speech impediment.
Sarah Connor.
My friends call me Murphy. You call me RoboCop.
Dr. Banner, belted by gamma rays.
Brainiac, what is it?
Look, I just want some pants. A decent pair of pants.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
It's morphin' time!
Put an ad on the front page. Cash money for a picture of Spider-Man. He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said,
It's clobbering time.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's time to open up those Sunday funny papers, and we are recording and welcoming you to TWIG Sunday Funnies. I am your host, Mike the Birdman Dodd, but I'm not alone as I flip through these open and blank pages you see laying before you. I am joined with
AT from Saskatoon. How you doing?
And Alex, the producer.
That's right. So we are back on our second ever issue of this brand new podcast, and we're still kind of working out the kinks here as I will be leading the hosting duties for at least the next couple of months while JT acclimatizes to recording with us, as I'm sure we've traumatized him over many years of listening to Twig, but now you're a part of the family, and that's always how it seems to go. People begin as fans, and then they eventually just start working with us, but that's okay.
Oh, dear God, I had no idea what it was going to be like.
I know, right? So anyway, guys, we have a lot of ground to cover in this second episode of the show. Over the last month, in our first episode, we talked about the Power Rangers comics by Boom Studios, more or less focusing on the Shattered Grid event, which is finally they're kind of talking about it again in the Boom Studios comics. They're going to be doing a Lord Draken miniseries this summer. There's also going to be a Ranger Slayer miniseries, which deals with the worlds of the coinless, and obviously with like COVID-19, it pushed back a lot of comic book retailers' dates, so it's now been moved to like mid to early July. The Lord Draken series got announced for August. TMNT Power Rangers just got pushed to the middle of June. So we're finally getting the Power Rangers comic stuff that's going to be resolved at some point. So yay. But in this episode of the show, we're actually going to be talking about comic book crossovers, and that not only includes intercompany crossovers where, like, hey, the X-Men are going to appear in the Avengers books, or the Punisher is going to go hang out with Spider-Man for the day. No, we're actually going to be talking about some of the big heavy hitters where we sort of cross the streams, if you will, where we have interdimensional rifts. And we're going to talk about some comic books that have crossed over with each other. I mean, some most notable examples a lot of people can think of without really even putting too much thought into it is RoboCop versus the Terminator, which came out in the early 90s. That's a big primary example. Alien versus Predator is another one, and there's been a whole bunch that have happened since, and we're going to talk about our various experiences with them. Me and JT will primarily be drawing from some that happened in the early 90s or early to mid 90s rather, and I've actually just started rereading them thanks to the wonderfulness that is the internet. Some of these I didn't get a chance to read in their original print runs, so it's kind of neat to see how everything works and just look at it through modern comic book sensibilities. You wonder how this got past editorial. But I digress. So we're going to start things off with Alex here in the show, simply because Alex is and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, is perhaps the least well-read of us in this regard. Me and JT keep up with comics a little bit more than he does. I obviously read the Power Rangers, Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtle crap, but I've always kept my interest whenever certain xenomorphic creatures are involved. I tend to pick up those books as well. But without any further ado, let's hear from Alex, the producer.
Yes. I read comics as a kid, as I mentioned before, in bits and pieces here, and I was mostly reading the Star Trek stuff and a few other comics in the last few years. And I was sort of off the map for a while, but a few that came to mind were some of the Star Trek crossovers. They've been pretty good. I'll start with the IDW stuff. They did a crossover with the Legion of Superheroes. Oh, let me see. How long ago was that? Let's pull it up on my app. Because it was one I remember seeing when I went to the comic stores initially when I started collecting stuff again. And I went, ooh, that looks interesting, because it was on the shelf, and I was like, and it was dirt cheap. 2012. So it was something where I was like, wait, how are they doing this? Like, because I was like, that's two different companies altogether. It's two different publishers. I don't know how they've done it, but IDW has found a way sometimes to work with main competitors, actually. Like, would you say, guys, that DC is considers IDW a competitor, or are they considered a lesser than?
I don't know if lesser than is the right... I don't think they see them as...
They service different markets. I would consider them... Yeah. They're kind of like... Threat. Yeah, they're not really a threat. They just cover a different... They cater to a different niche.
So they would look at them and go, okay, we'd be willing to maybe work with you versus working with Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, this is one, and I'm only going to talk briefly about it because it was actually the first crossover comic I picked up at the time, and I had heard of you hear the Alien versus Predator and all that sort of stuff, but it wasn't something I had picked up as a kid or anything. I had my only experience had been with the movies, but this was the first time I saw something where I was like, this is supremely different. As far as it wasn't like superheroes crossing over with superheroes. This was what we would consider to be hard sci-fi crossing over with superheroes. And it's a pretty interesting book in that it blends them quite well. There isn't anything in it that stands out as far as being, super memorable. It's just one I wanted to do as an honorable mention because it was the first crossover I'd ever read. As far as other Star Trek crossovers, I have two more that I can get into here, and one of them I know you're going to want to talk about as well, Michael. But the first one was the Star Trek X-Men crossover. This one came, so this is now working with the other competition company. This one came in the mid-90s, and the funny thing is, I didn't know this comic existed until a few years ago when I read the sequel. The sequel itself was released as a novel. And so I read that. I was like, that's cool. I got it for $1 at bargain bin somewhere. And I was like, wait, this is a sequel to what? I'm like, a comic book. So then I had to go back and read it. And it's the 90s X-Men crossed over with the original Star Trek, Captain Kirk team. And it blends a bit of the Shi'ar Empire with it. I don't know. Did you guys get a chance to read through this one at all?
No,
yeah, I did.
I didn't, but I can talk about a little bit about the marketing for this.
Go ahead.
I remember reading in Wizard Magazine, if you remember that, folks, from many, many years ago. Wizard Magazine at the time was a publication that focused primarily on comic books. It would also give you a price guide for key issues. So it'd be like, hey, Spider-Man #1 is worth this. Fantastic Four number 48 is worth this. So it was one of those valuable, things that was updated monthly, but it would also give you articles, previews, and sort of insights into what was going on in the comic book industry. And I specifically remember them talking about the X-Men versus Star Trek crossover as being something different. And I remember a piece of key art, and I guess it was just done specifically for Wizard. And this may be my memory fucking with me. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I remember Captain Picard being on the bridge and with Worf, Data, and Geordi, and then Wolverine, Cyclops, Jean Grey and Rogue on the other side, sort of that classic face-off pose that you've always seen. Or I remember Wolverine pulling his claws at Captain Picard sort of thing. But I remember it being kind of a big deal.
That's for the novel, because the novel was next gen. The comic was original series.
When did the novel come out?
Oh, let me pull that up here. I forgot. I know it was later.
Yeah, because I seem to remember this marketing. I remember reading about it.
I remember that too. Like first in Wizard, I think the novel came out within months of
it's
First
called
Contact.
It's called Planet X, 1998.
So probably about 2 to 3 years after the initial crossover.
Yes, exactly. 2 years later.
Wasn't the comic called Second Contact?
Or something along those lines.
Yeah, because, I mean, 96 was when First Contact came out, which is, when the first Trek X-Men crossover happened. And then the storyline, as I remember, of the Star Trek X-Men Second Contact was, this is what happened to the Enterprise E on the way back from the events of First Contact. And they ended up in the 1990s Marvel Universe, and they met the then current team, but it was slightly different from the team that Kirk and crew had met.
Well, the comic was from 1996, and it was just had the two names, with a slash between them. As far as the sequel was Star Trek: The Next Generation / X-Men Planet X, and it was oh, wait a minute. I think I know what you guys are talking about. So it says here, this plot was detailed in a preview edition 1-issue comic crossover. So it says here, Star Trek X-Men crossover comic. There was a one-shot that was heavily promoted to promote the novel. So they were trying to launch, I guess, this crossover novel series. And it says the book itself was heavily marketed. So that one, I didn't even know there was a preview edition. And it looks like what it did was it took some of the basic plot points from the beginning of the book and put them to panels.
Yeah, because that is something I clearly remember seeing in my comic book shop, which was Mike's bookstore, in Sound for many, many years. And that's just an image that's always stuck with me. And I will say, frankly, one of the weirder ideas for a crossover, just superhumans, mutants in Star Trek, is not the combination that I think of.
Well, the whole thing is similar stories. You can tell, there's, instead of aliens, dealing with different social issues, it's mutants. But as a kid, if I had known this existed, this would have blown my mind. It's just, I used to go to the comic shop as a little kid, and I would, but I would finger through the 10-cent, bins. At the time, this would have been new and on the regular shelf.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember because, again, like I read Wizard magazine just like Mike did in the 90s. I remember reading an issue where they're talking about Marvel's getting into this publishing venture with Paramount, because this is a time when they had like Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Academy, Star Trek New Voyages, which was a series that featured on the Pike era crew prior to Kirk and Spock and McCoy. And I read this like the first Star Trek X-Men crossover where there's the X-Men are coming back from the Shi'ar galaxy and shenanigans, which was literally a rip in space, and they get sucked into the TOS universe. And one of my two favorite things I remember in that, having reread it and kind of forgot about it, Spock dropped Wolverine with the Vulcan nerve pinch, and then he cocked the requisite eyebrow when Wolverine was up like 10 seconds later. But it was drawn in such a way Spock was like, the fuck?
Yeah, yep. It's exactly like when I was reading that, I was chuckling to myself. Like the quote in here is, he explains what he's going to do to him. Basically, it's a nerve pinch. The effect is temporary on humans, and Wolverine gets up and he just goes, "I got your nerve pinch right here," and Spock just goes, "Fascinating."
Yeah, and then what was it? Oh yeah, the requisite Kirk macking on anything with two tits and a heartbeat. So of course he goes for the redhead of the X-Men crew, and then she's like, "Yes, Cyclops, my husband." And Kirk's like, "Oh." Like, I'm surprised there isn't an STD named after James T. Kirk in the Star Trek universe. I think that would exist.
It all gets filtered out in the transporter biofilter.
Oh, that's why he's. Why do you think the bridge crew's always going on away missions? Because you know it's
Must
the only
way.
Like,
must get clean.
It's like oh, I'll go on the mission. Like, take the shuttle. No, I don't want to take the shuttle.
See, the only one that Kirk definitely didn't get with was McCoy, because he was always paranoid of the goddamn transporter.
Well, because he knows too much.
He knows. And to throw it back to the Star Trek Legion crossover, there, like you said, I actually have the hardcover. I got it for pretty cheap too at my local store. I actually didn't get to read it before the recording, but I remember in one issue, the big moment in there for me is where they come across, I think it's the Time Trapper was the main villain, or whoever the main villain was, and he's got this trophy room with like every time travel apparatus from pop culture. Like, there's the Stargate, Hot Tub Time Machine, the dagger from Prince of Persia, Bill and Ted, and the TARDIS.
I think there's a time tunnel in the background too.
Yeah, time tunnel. So many different things. Like the DeLorean, you see like the back end of the DeLorean over the corner.
Yeah, like I wasn't going to say, like, it's not the best comic in the world, but it was my introduction to real, true crossovers. They're not crossovers where it's like, hey, this company also produces this comic and it's in the same universe. Let's team them up. No, this was like wildly out there. And then from there, it's how I found out they did the X-Men one. And the final one is one that I read as it was coming out, as far as the Star Trek ones I'm talking about. And that is the Star Trek Doctor Who crossover, which I figured would have given Birdman an nerdgasm, and did it, because they had done a crossover before, but this was the big crossover right at the height of Doctor Who's newfound fame.
Yeah, like this is taking place with the 11th Doctor, which is Matt Smith, and everybody loves Picard, and it takes place before any of the movies. This takes place during the TNG run and aboard the Enterprise D, so not the E or anything. So it has the super familiar setting, super familiar characters, and while reading it, it feels like literally like the writers of Doctor Who were allowed to play in the Star Trek universe, and it doesn't really break much. No, it feels authentic.
And it keeps the pace of both somehow. Like, Star Trek's always been a little slower moving, so you could see the scenes where it's more Star Trek oriented feel like a Star Trek episode, and the parts where Doctor Who is there's a sense of manic energy.
Yeah. I also love there's one of the parts, because I think it was like an 8-issue run, where not only do we see Matt Smith and the Pawns, Matt Smith's Doctor and the Pawns on the Enterprise, it goes back to EOS, and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy run into the 4th Doctor. And one of my favorite moments there is where the 4th Doctor, all teeth and curls, leans into Mr. Spock and goes, "Chili, baby?" And Spock spends like the next 3 panels like, "Fascinating. Gelatin coated in like starch." And I was like, oh my God, Spock is a foodie.
And one of the neat things about that particular section in the comic is the art style changes too. Like, it looks like the 60s animated show.
Yeah, it does have that lighter quality.
Yeah, and that was just something I was like, I'm really glad they did it. And that's the big thing I was really worried about with the Star Trek Doctor Who, because anything that looks like a painting can be very off-putting. Like, there are some Alien versus Predator books that have fantastic stories, but the artwork I can't fucking stand. And I was really worried the IDW stuff was going to lean into that. But here, it's detailed enough, yet artistic enough, where it works. And with Doctor Who being all sorts of weird and strange, you kind of worry if you're going to lose some of that fantastic detail. No, the artist who did this really hit it right on the head. Plus, when you merge the Borg and the Cybermen, they paid attention to little details. Like, these were not the Cybus Industries Cybermen, so they weren't from the parallel universe. They were Cybermen of the new design, but they weren't. So there are enough little Easter eggs in there hidden.
Yeah.
For true Doctor Who fans.
The go-to people would have thought is, it should have been Daleks. It's like, no. The idea is, we only ever see the Borg really assimilating humanoid types. So, the Alliance, it makes for, in my mind, a better visual than some sort of Borged out
salt and pepper shaker.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't need to see a Borged out R2D2 for it to be entertaining, but this was a cool idea that way. As far as, they could have done more, I think. This could have been a crossover that happened a few times, but it was still pretty good. I would have liked if we got a one-shot of, Doctor Who versus the Q Continuum.
Oh, God. You see Matt Smith's Doctor just making John Delancey's Q just lose his shit?
Yeah, and you could even, go so far as it's an excuse to have all the doctors meet together because they go into the continuum and they just somehow are all there.
Yeah, although they did have there is a Doctor Who miniseries, I think it was Prisoners of Time, where it was 11 issues, and every issue, there's little kind of beginning and end story bits, but the main thrust of the story was, it was the first Doctor, then the second on the way down and to the 11th, and it was all their individual companions were being taken from various moments in time. And it all leads to, actually, I think it's the Tennant Doctor, because the main villain turned out to be one of the companions from Tennant's run.
Really? Who was it?
It was I can't remember his name. It was the kid that was working with the Suntarans, who went off with the Doctor and Rose, and he had like that weird...
The brain implant?
The brain implant, and because he was angry at the Doctor for like abandoning him, promised to take me and see all these things, and he wanted revenge for all the years that he's, because he missed out on so much when the Doctor said, nuts to you, and kicked him to the curb.
Well, that's what you get for getting cybernetics when the Doctor tells you, no.
Yes, exactly.
Now, when you spoke about Easter eggs in this Doctor Who Star Trek series, Alex, do you guys remember the last Easter egg in the last issue?
The Bad Wolf one?
No, not the Bad Wolf. Specifically a Star Trek Easter.
No, do tell.
They enter the Borg as, they've teamed up because the Cyber Borg men are going to go off and do their own thing. Or was it the Borg? And I forget. One of the bad guys' team turned on the other. Big shock. And in the last panel, it's in the Borg cube, analyzing data, blah, blah, blah. Begin project to look into time travel.
First Contact.
Yeah, they set up the events of First Contact at the end of this crossover.
Right, yeah. Okay. I drew a blank on that, but you're right. That's an interesting way to work it in.
Yeah, because I remember when I read that issue, like I've got all the individual issues somewhere in my collection, and I read that, and that's where you get that, like the warm and tinglies, like I noticed something, and you feel so good. I know we've both seen your list of crossover comics, Alex. There's one on there I didn't know existed, and I really wish I would have read before we got to this.
Okay. My next two, I'm assuming it's from those two, are Archie crossovers, which, everybody always grew up. We grew up, and traditionally we were told, Archie comics are for girls. That was just the traditional thing.
I never heard that once in my life.
When I was little, it was, that's for girls and moms, because it's in the same vein as Casper the Ghost and Richie Rich. Those were comics that moms and girls liked. That was just it was a standard sort of thing that kids would say. But I was always the kid that would like grab them when the digests and read them while I was waiting in line to go through the supermarket. And then they started coming out with weird ones like meeting Kiss, or they had the crossovers with like, because they started having licenses with like Ninja Turtles and stuff.
Mhm.
The one here is the older one from the 90s that I had seen in the store. I never bought it. And then, recently when we were doing this crossover, I was like, I have to finally get that. And are you talking about Archie Meets the Punisher?
No, I know and love that with all my heart. It's the second one you have here, but don't spoil that.
I won't spoil that. Well, let's get into Archie Meets the Punisher first.
Yeah.
What the hell?
No, I'm pretty sure that was the exact line of thought. 'Cause I remember reading probably a Spider-Man, or it might have been an Archie comic. I read like Harvey comics, like Casper and all that growing up. Like as comics, hey, John likes comics, read this. So I'm one of those one of the ads on there, and it's the Punisher, and it was I think it was the cover where the Punisher's firing his machine gun, and there's target over the Punisher's skull, but the top bit from the teeth up is clearly it's Archie's head. It even has like that hair, like that checkerboard pattern they would draw in his hair sometimes. And I was just like, qu'est-ce que fuck?
Well, that's the thing, because the entire issue, it has an advertising, 48 pages, no ads. Yeah, and I was thinking, I looked at that now back in the day, and I was like, what? Like I thought it was like a parody, because I'm like, there's no way the Punisher would be in like, is this like a joke comic? Like, you know how there were books that like the Goosebumps series was out, and then you had the mock books like Gooflumps and all that sort of stuff. I thought, okay, maybe it's one of those, not realizing that it was a Marvel Comics and Archie Comics official crossover.
When you finally, if you never read this, folks, this is the first one that I'm saying, pause the podcast, get online, go to Comics All, get to your local store if it's open for the pandemic, and buy this comic, because it is 100% fried gold.
It's a lot of pages. There's a lot of detail in it. Some parts, it can be anything. It's very 90s. 1994, I think, is when it came out. So there's some parts where you're like, get to the point. But you realize it's all building up for the crazy stuff that's going to happen.
And honestly, the ultimate, like, the climax of this one, Alex, that wasn't the craziest part to me about this crossover. Not even the fact that they get, like, regular artists and teaming up with, I believe it was John Buscema did some of the art, like, particularly the Punisher stuff, so it was kind of an artist, if I remember correctly. But that the climax of the story wasn't the craziest part. Hell, the tease on the last page wasn't the craziest part. The craziest part is the Punisher goes undercover at Riverdale High, and Miss Grundy starts macking on Frank Castle.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one writer. The writer was Batten Lash, but then the Punisher artist was John Buscema, and then the Archie artist was Stan Goldberg. And it's not a case of, certain panels or certain pages are drawn by each. They basically drew their own characters within the panels.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, if there's not, that's probably the most crossover I could possibly think of. You're literally mashing two different artists on the same page.
Like, talk about some crossovers before we started recording, or like, you got peanut butter in my chocolate, you got chocolate in my peanut butter. This is, you got my Sour Patch Kids in my Cheese Whiz levels of strange.
They went so far as on the first page of the book to have a picture of the Punisher and a picture of Archie, and have an entire bio for each of them, because they weren't sure if readers of either would know the other characters, because it was so out of the realm. And I wasn't trying to say, Archie's just for girls. That was, as a kid, what we grew up hearing. It was like, that's a crappy comic just for girls. Reality is, it was always a good comic, but so many people didn't. If you were a hardcore Marvel reader, you probably didn't read, for the most part, Archie. And if you were an Archie casual reader, you probably didn't know who the Punisher was. You might have a small inkling as to who he was, because at this point, the Dolph Lundgren movie had come out, but it wasn't a huge hit. So
I saw the Dolph Lundgren movie until like years after this comic.
Yeah. So this might have been, for a lot of people, their first introduction. So I just thought it was funny that they had to put that there because they couldn't just jump in because they weren't as cemented in pop culture as they are now. And the basic plot is without spoiling too much, it's just the Punisher is searching for a guy who calls Red, who happens to look like ugly Archie with buck teeth, and he runs away to Riverdale and impersonates Archie, and there's hijinks ensue where the Punisher mistakes Archie for the bad guy, and then they eventually have to team up to stop the bad guy.
Yeah. Did you read this in preparation, Mike?
I didn't read this one. I read a different Archie crossover, which, man, have I got opinions.
We will talk about that after.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
No, sorry, you go, Alex.
Yeah, this one, Mike, this is worth a read. It's from the era where sometimes they would cram too much on the page. It almost feels like for the 48 pages, it could have been 60 or something to sort of spread it out a little bit. But the pacing is actually pretty good considering you're coming from, it's one writer, but they're having to incorporate the backstories and mannerisms of both worlds, which is I find fascinating because this is not a case of a superhero comic crossing over with another superhero comic where it's fairly easy to integrate them. This had to be a nightmare originally to try to integrate.
I want to know how you walk into the offices of Marvel in the early 90s and say, look, guys, fellas, I got this idea. Archie Andrews, Frank Castle. How can we make this happen?
I'm thinking it's one of two things. One, weren't they in some pretty bad financial straits at this point in 1994, 93?
The mid-90s,
it was definitely starting to not look good.
Because I know when did that X-Men relaunch happen where it sold like a bazillion?
92, I think. 92 or 91.
Yeah, but wasn't it pretty much only that and Spider-Man that were selling?
Yeah, because people hated the Clone Saga, but they kept buying it.
So
I'm to know.
And I know the cartoons were doing okay, but I kind of get the feeling this was a case of if they had said, "Can we get Spider-Man?" they would have gone, "No." But this was a case of here's a secondary guy, and I'm willing to bet you that in 1993, 1994, Archie had a significantly larger reader base than the Punisher did.
Yeah, because at that time with Archie comics, because big surprise, I read every comic I could get my kid. This was at a time when there was a notoriously large expansion of Archie titles. I mean, you had Archie, Betty and Veronica, and I forget a couple of others. But then you got like Jughead.
Cheryl had her own book, I think.
Yeah, Veronica got her own ongoing.
Josie the Pussycats and everything.
Well, yeah, that was always there. Sabrina, I think, got a new one. And then you had stuff like Explorers of the Unknown or Archie's RC Racers, Jughead's Diner, Jughead's Time Police.
Did they have the Sonic comics at that point?
Yes,
and this is around the time they got the thing.
And Sonic
and
was
Turtles,
a fantastic. Right? Yes, they originally had the Turtles license for a couple years, and they did a pretty good run with that. And then their Sonic run was really good for a really long time, if a little convoluted towards the end.
Original characters. No, let's not get into that. But didn't they also do the Mega Man one?
I don't.
Mega Man, I think, was Udon.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I for some reason I always thought it was them too, but wait,
it might have been them towards the end because I mean it's been a couple of years now since they lost the license.
Yeah, you know what? I do remember. Yeah, it was because I remember that was an interesting thing with the Sonic comic. It was one of the few where you'd actually find their comics at the grocery stores. Because I guess Diamond only distributed.
They're always by the friggin' checkout till.
Yeah,
always.
Like there's always the digest and that, but I mean, full size comics, you could actually get Archie and anything that Archie published. So no wonder the Sonic the Hedgehog was popular because it was one of the few comics for years that you could actually get at an actual regular store.
Yeah.
I remember buying my first issue of Sonic at a Foodland. I then ended up selling it for like $50 to a Sonic mega fan because he had every other issue of Sonic except #1, and I kept it because at that time I was in I was sort of collecting anything that I could get my hands on, but I always kept everything bagged and boarded. And I was like, fuck, I'm 13, 14 years old. I would like $50, please, that I could spend it on chips, cookies, candy, and something else stupid. It was worth it in the end.
Yeah. I mean, outside of the insanity of this idea, like there was a lot of coke in that meeting when Archie walked in. Guys, you need money. We like making more money. This is one of the first comics that I wanted to get the alternate covers to, because like I said, there's the main cover, which is Punisher skull with Archie face. There's one where the Punisher is sticking like an Uzi into Archie's nose and Archie is just sweating buckets. And then there's one where it's a prom like dance. Archie's dating or dancing with Veronica. And it's like, I knew there was going to be a chaperone, but sheesh. And you just see Punisher standing in the corner, keeping an eye on things, holding his machine gun.
That's the cover I remember the most clear from this crossover.
And the most modern one, because they've changed it when they went to having digital copies. It's sort of an orange and yellow cover. It's got Archie's head in the background, like a big oval, and the Punisher shooting his machine gun on the front.
That's an homage to I think it's Amazing Spider-Man number 127, which is the first appearance of the Punisher.
Yeah.
So yeah, that seems to be what they've gone with when they reissued it. Because I don't know what the original cost on it was, but on this digital edition, it's got the cover on there. Looked like it was $4 American, $5.35 Canadian. I don't imagine it was that much money in even being 48 pages. I don't imagine it was that much in 1994.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love this comic.
But yeah, do yourself a favor. This is one to pick up, and I believe originally when I got it from the Archie, from their actual website when they were clearing things out. Because I got it physical for like $2 because they were selling out everything. I don't think they sell physical books on their website anymore or even subscriptions. Maybe they do, but they were really trying to clear them all out and move towards doing digital only. It's one to check out, but I think we know now which one you guys want to talk about, and it's going to sort of tie into something that Birdman and I are going to be doing later on this month, and that is in the modern day when they did, especially since the last 3 or 4 years when they did a big, actually it's probably about almost 10 years now, they did a big push to reinvent Archie for the modern day and try to grab as many general audience readers as possible. Because for a while they did sort of do mostly rehashes of previous stories. So they take an old story from the 40s and redo it to like now, just redraw it. It's like, that's, to be honest, kind of lazy. It was the equivalent of the Hollywood remake. And then they started doing a big push to do different stuff right around the time that the new TV show was coming out. Because everybody knows they did the Archie was the zombies one, and they've done some horror comics here and there. They did the one where they met Kiss, I think, a couple times. But then we started getting weird shit like Archie versus Sharknado.
Yeah, oh boy. So this is a crossover I didn't expect because the Asylum and Sci-Fi Channel, or Sci-Fi, I guess the brain trust over there somehow got in touch with the Archie publishing people and pitched this idea. Now, the comic continuity-wise takes place after the second Sharknado, which is Sharknado, the second one, and before Sharknado 3, oh hell no. Betty and Veronica are with her father going to DC, and a Sharknado hits, and then they have to get back to Riverdale before the Sharknadoes can hit the dance, which is going to happen. And holy shit, this is fucking violent. Like, people are dying left, right, and center.
First couple pages, their father comes out and is like, "We have to get back to as he gets his arms bit off and gets torn to pieces."
I was like, oh my God. I mean, I didn't expect any mainline Archie people to die. No, they kill a shit ton. I mean, there's one panel. I posted this on my personal Facebook, and I was like, well, do you remember the time when a Sharknado hit Riverdale? So at one point, Sabrina is on a boat because Cheryl's holding a party on her boat or whatever. And she's like, hey guys, I can get rid of the Sharknado with some magic. So she waves her arms to
Oh, it's Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
Yeah, two sharks jump out of the water, bite her arms off, and eat Salem the cat.
Yeah. She's like, oh, you guys look like you could use some magic. And she's like, we're just dead. It was like something out of that Too Many Cooks or any of those weird, like, late night Adult Swim fake commercial things. Like, it was that absurd.
Just before that, where one of my favorite Archie tropes is Midge and Big Moose. You see Big Moose, hulks out, "Keep your jaws off my girl!" He just straight up, like, rips one in half. And I was like, yeah, don't fuck with Moose's girl.
Oh yeah, and then like Dilton Doily becomes like a fucking mad computer hacker. Betty and Veronica start wielding chainsaws at people. Cheryl gets eaten by a shark but lives.
The cover's an homage to Army of Darkness, and there's multiple references to Ash in it a few times.
Oh yeah. It's so amazingly violent, but it's so weirdly entertaining from cover to cover that it was very hard to stop reading because I couldn't believe the violence I was seeing.
And the whole thing is done deadpan, like they're not pandering. It's done in the same regular, cheerful style of Archie. It's just like, this is part of the world now, and like as if it's completely normal, and they don't even react like you would figure the panic that they would react with. They react with the kind of panic they would in a regular Archie comic. And they're just like, hey, this isn't cool. I mean, Jughead bites one of the sharks.
Yeah, because they stole his sushi or something stupid like that.
He bites it. And the look on the shark's face is, oh my God, what are you doing?
Like, you're messing with the natural. There's one show you see a shark wearing Jughead's crown, and I was like, the hell? And
he's like, I'm going back for my hat.
Yeah. And I also love the fact when we need protection, and good old Mr. Svensson shows up, and they go into his murder room. And it's not the mechanic shop. He's a fucking serial killer. He's got like a dozen chainsaws hanging from chain hooks on the ceiling. Like, I'm pretty sure Svensson is Swedish for Leatherface.
And for some reason, there's an opossum in the background, I think. Or is it a warthog?
Yeah, and then he's got like a pegboard full of knives and axes. Like, I might give you the axes and the scythe for gardening duties. I might, maybe 2 chainsaws. You do not need this many chainsaws, Svensson. You have a problem.
My dude has 7 chainsaws, all color coordinated.
Although this is not, if you can believe that, it may have the highest body count of any of the Archie crossovers, but it is not the most violent.
Probably Predator, I would assume, right?
Yes. I saw this. I saw some panels out of this. I posted the Sharknado page on my Facebook, and one of my friends posted, he's like, oh yeah? You think that's intense? Check this out, Mike. So it shows Dilton Doily, and he's talking to somebody, and the Predator just straight up uses his wrist blades, guts him from behind, pulls his neck, and he sub-zeros him. Takes his head and spine right out, like trophies.
This is from slightly before this is when they were revamping, but it's before Riverdale launched. Ever since Riverdale launched, they've gone like full blown, made for adults dark comics, all of them, and it's been because they realized they're not going to sell to preteens anymore.
Well, it's so intense because at one point, like, these beloved characters, like, they're not dying. Dying is too nice a word. They are being slaughtered. At one point, again, the same Predator pulls out his wrist blades and stabs Sabrina right through the chest. And that's not an honorable kill in his world if we're looking at it. But still.
In this comic, this has a little more of the old school slapstick feel, right? One point, Betty uses a baseball bat to smack a homemade time bomb into a Sharknado to make it explode.
Yeah. I was like, what? But yeah, it was intense.
They're all running away, and it's like, not everybody survives. They kill a lot of people. What I love is they're all out there doing sort of their victory sort of stance at the very end. And they're just standing in water surrounded by severed heads.
And like nothing phases them. I love Pop Tate is like, okay, Jughead, you and your dog better not get any funny ideas. I'm not putting shark on the menu. And Jughead is like, nah, I've lost my taste for fish. I was like, okay, literally, let's say half the town has been annihilated by a Sharknado. And the first thing that Pop Tate's concerned with is this asshole that never pays his burger tab.
Not to mention, it looks like the world is like Waterworld. They're under about a foot of water, the entire land. I don't know how it happened, but it doesn't matter. And then there's just trees that they turned into sharpened sticks with tons of sharks speared on top of them.
And you know there's something wrong because Svensson looks at the camera and he's just got that, like, you can almost see the twinkle in his eye. I was just like, this dude is a serial killer.
Yeah. And the last frame is just him going, how am I going to get down from here?
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, and that's the end. And I read that and I went, oh, Mike's going to love it.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't seeing that coming. I was like, it's Archie. They're not going to kill that many people. They still have certain things to uphold to. No, the asylum said, you know what? Just let it kill your characters.
You thought it was going to be like, oh, golly gee, what a Sharknado. Oh, gee, Willikers, what am I going to do? Oh, golly gee. And instead it was, oh, fuck. Oh, God, it hurts. Oh.
It was so violent. I was like, holy shit.
It's so red. There's so much red.
Any more books you want to talk about, Alex?
That there's plenty more I could talk about. Those are my picks because I know you guys have a bunch of doozies to talk about.
Okay, so I'm going to start here and then we'll go to JT. I'm going to talk about one of the more popular ones simply because I think this is one of the first big ones. And I'm not going to talk about intercompany crossovers because those I'm not super familiar with because I haven't read a lot of regular stuff from DC or Marvel. That just wasn't my bag for many, many, many years. However, that may be changing. One of the first big ones I remember reading in the 90s and getting my hands on was RoboCop versus the Terminator, which is it turns out both companies had multiple comics after their movies. Like there was a company that released one called Future War, like before Terminator 2 came out. RoboCop had comics done by Marvel, if I remember correctly, and they dealt with fairly adult themes, but they hadn't decided to mash these two characters up. So I think it was Frank Miller, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure, and Dark Horse were like, hey, you love these two characters. What can you do with them? What could be connective tissue other than Terminator travels back in time to kill RoboCop? It all ties back to artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is it turns out the ability for Skynet to gain sentience is based upon RoboCop's brain pattern. So when Alex J. Murphy died, OCP and Cyberdyne, I guess, had some kind of an agreement to develop military tech, because it's mentioned in the first RoboCop movie that they have military contracts. So when Alex's brain gets uploaded to Skynet, it becomes sentient, and then Judgment Day, and then hilarity ensues. So the Terminator gets sent back in time to kill Alex J. Murphy before he can become RoboCop. However, she kind of misses the date by a little bit, and she's sent back after RoboCop is becoming, the future of law enforcement. So the machines decide they have to go back and protect RoboCop so this upload can eventually happen. I think the character sent back is a woman named Flo, if I remember correctly. And then it basically follows what happens when RoboCop fails. He gets his ass kicked, but not before I think a pair of T-800s get taken out by like Ed 209. At one point. But either way, Alex's brain gets uploaded to Skynet. His consciousness is lost in the machine forever. He's literally helpless to watch as humanity is slaughtered. Judgment Day happens, blah, 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 blah. However, one day he finds he's able to regain parts of his consciousness. And as he does this, he regains control of a Terminator factory. He rebuilt himself a RoboCop body using a Terminator endoskeleton. And he joins the human resistance saying, maybe we can stop all this. And eventually he's like, well, wait a second. If I can build one of myself, what's to stop me from building hundreds of myself?
Jeez.
So he builds himself a fucking army, and they go to basically Cheyenne Mountain and annihilate Skynet. But he's like, wait, maybe I can stop all this before it happens. So he goes back in time and destroys Skynet when it's a satellite, back in the 1990s or something. And RoboCop is like, something feels different. I guess it's another sunshiny day. And that future never happens. However, before all this can happen, Skynet's like, oh shit, we're going to die. So they're able to send back a very weak Terminator to go back and do some time fuckery. However, they miss by about 65 million years and it gets stepped on by a dinosaur. So yeah. The Terminators are taken out by a dinosaur at one point. But I just thought this was such an ambitious idea because I never thought of meshing these two universes together. Now, there was a second crossover, which I haven't read yet. I think it's called RoboCop vs. Terminator, called Kill Human. So I may look on Comixology for that, see if it's available. But it was one that caught my attention.
Sorry, are the games based on the comic as well, or is it just unrelated?
Loosely? They weren't allowed to use official artwork, so they had to redraw the artwork. I've watched a YouTube video on this the other day, and according to that guy's video, they weren't allowed to use official artwork, but they could loosely base it upon the same storyline. And it turns out the Genesis version is the superior version because the developers built it for that hardware. The Super Nintendo may look a little bit better, but the Genesis version is the superior version because you can turn off the blood and gore and everything. And they just built it like that. Like RoboCop versus the Terminator, it has a lot of its design elements influenced by Contra 3, the Alien Wars. And according to that guy's video that I saw, you can beat RoboCop versus the Terminator with taking remarkably little damage if you're good enough. And I always found those games to be fucking brutal, but fun. Yeah, so go get the RoboCop versus the Terminator. And the price is steadily going up on those cartridges, so keep an eye out. The next series, and this is going to be a very broad topic in terms of this, because I read the novel before I read the comic books, and that's Aliens versus Predator. And that was meant to be from an Easter egg in Predator 2 when Danny Glover's character gets aboard the Yacha spacecraft and he looks at all the trophies on the wall and you see an alien warrior skull and you're like, holy shit, these take place in the same universe. And I guess 20th Century Fox, since they own both properties, like tee-hee-hee. And then I guess Dark Horse was like, can we do something with this? And then they formed it. And the novel that I read, I don't remember a lot of the details, but it involved like a human colony, and there were like predators that were hunting aliens, and they called them the hard meat, and you had to kill an alien to get marked for your tribe, if I remember right. And a human woman becomes the first one to get marked by a predator clan. She gets like some kind of mark on her. I mean, this storyline was very loosely adapted for the Aliens versus Predator movie that came out in like 2001, I think.
Which I enjoyed, but even watching it, I was like, this is not as good as what I was hoping it was going to be.
Yeah, it had potential, but the book was a lot better, and I think the comic was pretty good, but it's been a while since I read it. The book that I read for this review was actually something I didn't expect to be as good as I expected it. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with John Wagner's Judge Dredd. I've only recently got into the role play game from EN Publishing, but when I found out there was Aliens versus Judge Dredd Incubus, I was like, okay, sure, why not? It's going to be Aliens versus Judge Dredd. What more could I expect? What I got was something surprisingly decent. Basically, there's this guy who's breeding aliens as a weapon against Mega City 1, and he was originally going to use one of his contacts ripped off an alien egg and was going to use a xenomorph to fight in these alien fight pits in the undercities of Mega City 1. Obviously, he doesn't survive, so Judge Dredd has to investigate what happens to him after the chest burster bursts out of his chest, invades a hospital, and a team of exterminators tries to hunt it down. What happens is, it turns out there was this guy named Mr. Bones who Judge Dredd put in the ISO cubes. He got out and he became like a space pirate and found alien eggs at one point, and they burned him. Like, his face is all fucked up and scarred. So he comes back with the alien clutch of eggs to infect people, and he raises an entire hive underneath Mega City 1, and he intends to unleash it upon the city and into the Hall of Justice. And judges get right fucked up in this. Like, this is one of the most brutal books I've ever seen in the Alien franchise. And one of the things I've always noticed about the Alien books in comic book form is they always fall back on this really weird art style where you can't see a lot of hyper detail. In the Judge Dredd book, you can see everything.
I was going to say, I really hated the art in this book. I had a hard time reading it.
I liked it.
It was too clustered, too close up, too the colors all blended together. I was not a fan of the art style they used, and I was turned off by the book entirely because of it.
I don't go back and compare it against some older Dark Horse stuff. Maybe that'll change your mind. Probably not. But I was just surprised how well they took the alien models.
I thought the story was good. But I just
the story was really good. Plus, they reference older things. Like, they talk about there are Judge robots that are built upon Judge Dredd's personality. I think they're called the Machismo bots or something, and they start wasting the aliens. They have several judges get infected. Several judges get taken out because of acid spray. Like, that's a big thing in this book. They're like, don't shoot at them. They're like, why? Because you do, they will explode in your face. People get like limbs bit off. They have one guy catches a face hugger, and when they try and remove it, it sprays acid at them. They're like, we can't get this thing off. What the hell do we do? Eventually, it involves drowning the alien queen. Well, if drowning being the operative word here, in lava underneath thing, and a new volcano is established in Mega City 1. But I thought this book was fucking fantastic. This book was way better than it had any right to be. And I don't think this is the first time Aliens and Judge Dredd have crossed paths, because in the Dredd universe, Aliens is just, it's a part of everyday life. There's colonies all over. Space travel is remarkably common. It's not unusual to run into another alien species, be it on Luna 1 or anywhere else on the cursed Earth or in Tech City or Brit-Sit. So I was really impressed with this, and I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. Because the aliens have obviously crossed over with Aliens vs. Predator. They fought Batman, Superman, the Green Lantern. I know there's a crossover book, but I haven't read it where it's Aliens versus Terminator versus Predator, and it's all three of them, and it takes place after, I think, Alien Resurrection, I want to say. And there's like a descendant of John Connor or something.
Okay. JT, you've been pretty quiet. Did you read this one at all?
I did, and I just wanted to let Mike kind of gush a little bit, because I knew, in procuring some of these things for the recording tonight, I knew Mike was really looking forward to, so I wanted to give him his moment. I did read this. I agree with you, Alex. I don't feel as strongly as you do about the art, but I did not like the art. It's something about it's textured. Like, just looking at it is just really hard to concentrate on any one thing. It's like scratchy almost to describe how it looked.
It leans very heavily on the Judge Dredd aesthetic as opposed to any of the previously established Alien stuff. That's something that I noticed.
Yeah.
Actually, I can articulate it a little better now. It feels like everything's done in a close-up shot, for one. The scratchy thing, it gives it almost like everything has like a burlap sack over it. Like, just sort of, it has a texture that is unappealing to me. Colors are washed out. They're off model all the time. Like they don't have an established ratio to their sizes.
It's just a little too mercurial.
It seems a little amateurish to me. That being said, the story's good.
Yeah, no, I love the story of what's the curse of Judge Dredd? Drock.
Yeah, there's Drock and Grodd and all this stuff. Like I thought
Drocking.
It was just it felt so in universe and not outside of it. Now the next book I want to talk about is the first book I remember crystal clear. I got this book in the late 90s, and this is after I'd read Alien versus Predator and RoboCop versus the Terminator, but I never owned this one. I remember specifically reading about in Wizard Magazine again, getting a preview for it and thinking, holy shit, they're actually gonna fucking do it. And this was Wildcats versus Aliens. You're thinking, who the fuck are the Wildcats? They were the Image Comics X-Men, more or less. They were Jim Lee's Wildcats. They had a cartoon show, which I still think is pretty cool. Like it has a very catchy theme song and very cool
Wildcats. Wildcats.
And then
against evil.
And then rapping for some reason. But anyway,
which I was surprised when you posted it. Very few people knew that show existed, but I remember watching it vividly.
Same here. Yeah, watched it on like Saturday mornings. I think it was on CBS.
It was that and Ultra Force. I remember used to air sort of back to back, and then they had that terrible. What was it? The Avengers show.
That was not very good. The Avengers never got their due until Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Anyway, so Aliens Wildcats turns out is official continuity, and that blew my mind. So the setup is there's an asteroid passing through our system, and Stormwatch, which is I guess their version of government superheroes, says, hey, we should go check this out. So they send out a couple of exploratory shuttles to the asteroid. Something comes back on somebody's face. And the Weatherman, who was another superhero who used to be known as Battalion, who's now known as the Weatherman, the guy in charge of Stormwatch, says, shit, I'm activating the storm door protocol, and locks off the station, but only after an escape pod crash lands in New York City with a character named Flint, I think her name was. Yeah. And the world's like, well, what the fuck? So Grifter, the guy with the red handkerchief over his face, and Zealot, the girl with the ninja swords, is like, okay, something's wrong here. We should check this out. Oh, it's not Zealot. It's Void, the silver robot lady.
Yeah.
And they talk with Marlowe, who's the alien imp who forms Wildcats, and is like, hey, something's wrong. We need to find out what's going on here. So they get the Wildcats back together. I guess they've been disbanded for a while. They go up to Stormwatch. Things are quiet. Like there's nobody around. And then they start running into aliens and they start fighting them. And they're like, well, what the fuck are these things? Maul, which is the big purple dude, grabs one of the aliens, rips it in half, destroys his hands, like to the point where he can't fight. Zealot's swords start wearing down. And she's like, my blades have killed 1,000 Damonites, and their blood has never scarred my weapons before. What the hell are these things? And it turns out that this was just a spacecraft going through the system, and they don't know why. They don't know who sent it. It's never established that I'm aware of. So it turns out that the aliens are colonizing Stormwatch. So as the book goes on, you start to see dead members of Stormwatch. Like there are two superheroes I remember three superheroes whose deaths I remember super clear. So there's Fuji and Hellstrike. Fuji and Hellstrike are two post gaseous humanoids or something along those lines. Basically means they're gas-based superheroes. They're in containment suits, or some part of them is gas. They're dead. So they enter the Stormwatch officers' lounge, and you just see this green vapor and their containment suits just on the floor. And one of the guys, I think it's Warblade, says, that smell, that's them. We're breathing in their dead bodies right now. And I think it's Grifter's like, I'm going to be sick. So they leave, and you go and you just see more and more dead Stormwatch personnel, more people cocoon to the wall and everything. And eventually they come across a hallway. There's all these fire marks. And this is a comic panel that's been burned in my mind for 25 years. And they come across, I think the character's name is Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And she's the team's pyrokinetic. And you just see all these fire marks on the wall. And you see the shadow, and you see this character, Lauren, come out of the shadows. And Grifter and all them and Spartan are like, Lauren, are you okay? What the hell's going on here? Like, what's up? And she doesn't talk. And you just see the panels continue to move. And you see this alien holding the body up with Lauren's guts hanging out of her stomach. And the alien looks at them, hisses, and breathes fire. And I'm like, holy shit, because as the aliens, as you know, they take on the traits of whatever species they infect. Which
is oh
yeah. I mean, even in, I think it was Superman versus Aliens. I think at one point Superman gets infected and it can't bust out of his chest because it's Kryptonian. Don't quote me on that because I haven't read it.
I was thinking, think of what would happen if it got into Wolverine. Would it be able?
You couldn't kill it.
You couldn't kill it, but would it be able to grow?
Yeah,
because his body would be constantly fighting it as an infection.
And that's something Marvel's done in their history, guys. Is the Brood from Chris Claremont's epic X-Men run, from the 70s into the 80s, and that the Brood are essentially his take on the Xenomorphs. And Wolverine can fight off unless it's like a mean Brood, he can fight off the infection. Eventually his healing powers, destroy the egg. And as far as the aliens absorbing the traits, that's something that I don't know if that's official canon, because I know there's a lot of fans that I've talked to are like, it is and it isn't.
Well, isn't it if you
they take
Prometheus?
On some trait?
Yeah, right? That's what changed the canon a bit.
Yeah, because they'll take on the dominant traits of whatever it is. And it is considered canon-ish, and this will just be me going off on a very short tangent, because if you look at Alien 3, whether the original cut or the director's cut, when you look at the runner alien, that's why that alien is bipedal and less intelligent than the warrior drones you saw on LV-426. Plus, some of this is from the role-playing game, which is, I guess, considered loose canon right now. But
which one was it? Like, I can't remember if it's director's cut or regular cut. Wasn't one of them an ox or a dog or something?
Yeah, that's in the producer-director's cut. Yeah, it comes from an ox, whereas in the theatrical, it's the dog.
Because remember, there's also that Aliens toy series that came out in the mid-90s, a couple of years prior to this comic. And they had like the bull alien and the scorpion alien and the spider alien.
Which, by the way, I love how so many R-rated or NC-17 movie franchises had toys for 7-year-olds.
Toys. Oh yeah, there was Rambo, there was RoboCop, there's Chuck Norris,
Toxic Avenger
had
NC-17
and a cartoon
/ X-rated, and it got
Sergeant Kabuki Man almost got a cartoon.
Kabuki Man would have worked in the early 90s. That would have worked really well. Like,
I think there's even like a 5-minute pilot produced for it.
Because you know what? It was right around the same time as the Mask and all that. That would have been perfect timing. Actually, it would have been a year too earlier.
Yeah. So Aliens versus Wildcats ends with most of them getting off the station. The Wildcats survive, heavily wounded, like Spartan's all fucked up, Void's fucked up, Grifter and Zealot almost die. One of the last surviving members of Stormwatch named Winter tells the rest of the team, they eventually secure a teleporter, they get everybody back down to Earth. He's like, well, somebody's got to stay behind. So he takes the Stormwatch space station, steers it into the sun, and he's like, well, I'm going to die anyway. So a few hours later, the reactors go down, but there's enough gravity, so it burns up in the sun, and that's the end. Now, JT gave me a reading list because I'd never read what happens after this. They officially acknowledge this as continuity, and this leads into the creation of, I think, the Authority.
So basically, this was official continuity to kill off that entire team for real?
Yeah. I was so surprised.
Because I kind of loosely followed Image Comics, specifically the Stormwatch and everything like this takes place in the Wildstorm universe, which is basically was Jim Lee's studio under Image before the founders all kind of started doing their own thing. But yeah, if you go from Wildcats Aliens into Stormwatch Volume 2, Issue 11, which was a series being written by Warren Ellis, that they say, yeah, we're not gonna start Stormwatch again. We can't afford the satellite. It was a drain on the budget. They're done, and that ends with Jenny Sparks going off to start the Authority. And like when I was talking with Mike, folks, prior to recording quite a while ago, think about it. This was a seismic shift in comic storytelling. This is one of the first times where death matters as much as it didn't before. And
like I had never seen anybody letting their IP be brutalized by another, and they kept it in continuity.
Yeah. Now, this is the end of the first, finger quotes, chapter of the Stormwatch story, because he goes on to the Authority and pretty much just Authority series for a few years. Eventually, they do kind of a quasi reboot of the Stormwatch comics, including Stormwatch, Gen 13, Wetworks was another Image-centric title, which kind of loosely tied into this universe. And they brought Stormwatch back, and it was revealed, I forget the shenanigans involved, but Fahrenheit, Winter, Hellstrike, and Fuji are resurrected. And they explained, because Winter's power was to absorb energy. So he essentially absorbed the souls or the power sets, whatever, of the other characters. And once they got brought back to Earth, they were able to be reconstituted. But yeah, this set the stage into this era of the Authority, which is basically it's the Justice League on a really bad day. Where
I'm kind of curious to get into this.
Yeah, the Authority is really good. Like it goes from Warren Ellis into Warren Ennis into it's Warren Ellis into Garth Ennis, and Ennis is, if you have read comics for any number of years, folks, check out his Preacher series. You might think the guy doesn't like God.
He's done some Max series stuff too. Like this, he doesn't write for children.
No. Like I remember he wrote a Shadow, like the Shadow, the Shadow Knows for Dynamite Comics a few years ago. When I saw that he was writing that, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to read this because there's at least a 50-50 chance the Shadow's going to end up in a creepy bondage situation by the end of the first issue. That being said, the Authority, Mike, I would highly recommend that. After the first 3 or 4 years, it's not woke politics, but they're like, we're sick of just saving the world. We're going to actually change it for the better. And it kind of falls off the rails a bit in my opinion.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. But yeah, when I saw this in Wizard, I was like, Wildcats Aliens. I was like, dear God, I didn't know I needed it this much in my life.
Yeah, like I said, I'm so glad that I was able to reread this, and it makes me, I might actually go back through Comixology and go back and reread the Stormwatch stuff, because I want to know more about these characters. I want to read more about Wildcats. And that's a weird thing. I am a DC Marvel guy, and even then, it's such a tenuous relationship at best. Though this is something, sure, I got to go back about 2 decades, but the shit looks cool. I'll check it out.
I can certainly help you with that. And if you don't have to, like, you can go back and read Stormwatch Volume 2, and it's barely self-contained, but you do get a better sense of the characters if you go from Volume 1 forward. I will let you know the first year of the original Stormwatch title, 90s AF.
That's what I'm in for, baby.
Yeah.
And then the last comics, me and JT are going to talk about this kind of jointly. This was a pretty big event. Now, I remember getting this when I was on my grade 8 trip to Ottawa. And this was the Amalgam series of comics. You might be saying, "Oh, Mike, what the fuck is that?" Well, I was just literally talking about how my relationship to DC and Marvel has always been kind of But again, Wizard, had told me about a wonderful idea they were doing, and they were going to do an intercompany crossover, not unlike RoboCop versus the Terminator or Aliens versus the Predator, except this time it was Superman versus the Hulk, it was Wonder Woman versus Storm, Shazam versus Thor, Robin versus Jubilee, but it was all these big characters fighting, and you, the fans, got to decide who wins. And at the end of the day, one shall stand, one shall fall. One universe is erased from existence, or so we thought. So it happens out over the course of 4 main issues. There's the basic setup is, and I'm not going to go into it too much. There are these 2 brothers that have existed since before time began, which are represented in Marvel by the Living Tribunal and in DC by the Spectre, who's essentially God. And these 2 forces, they hate each other. They oppose each other. They assert, I am dominant, thus I should exist and you should not. And then they forgot about each other's existence for billions upon billions of years. And then one day a bum comes across a cardboard box and sees a bum. Yeah. A bum comes across a cardboard box and sees that these 2 universes are at each other's throats. And he's one of the people across the universe who are aware of the brother's existence, but can't do anything about it. So the 2 universes start merging. So you start seeing like the Hobgoblin and the Green Goblin fighting Batman or Spider-Man. And you're like, okay. And just weirder things start happening. And then the 2 forces decide you must pick champions. And by the end of it, one of these universes shall cease to exist. Eventually, a character called Access forces the 2 universes to amalgamate and bind. And for the next few months, there was Amalgam Comics, which was DC and Marvel putting out a series of different amalgamated books. There was Amazon, which combined Storm and Wonder Woman. There was Bruce Wayne, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Doctor Strange Fate, Justice League X, Speed Demon, which is The Flash, and Ghost Rider. One of my favorite books, and I just read this one this afternoon because I love the artwork and the storytelling, was X Patrol. So I guess that was Doom Patrol and X Factor with Niles Cable, Beastling, Paige Guthrie as Dial Husk, Iron Lantern I was just reading, which is a little weird, with Hal Stark and Pepper Ferris. And it was just something so intense. And one of the most memorable creations to come out of this was Legends of Dark Claw, which combined Batman and Wolverine. And his opponent was Hyena, which I guess is the Jackal and the Joker.
Joker and Sabretooth.
Joker and Sabretooth, that's it. So they battle it out, and it was really, really well done. And then there were other comics that would come out later on where they revisited this, and there was Legends of Dark Claw, which is built upon a fictional Dark Claw, the animated series, and it was drawn by Ty Templeton, who has a very distinctive animated style to his artwork, and it really fits in the universe. They have like Lady Deathstrike, who's I think Talia al Ghul and Lady Deathstrike combined with Ra's al Apocalypse, where he gets taken up by a Stinger missile, which is kind of funny. But you get Super Soldier, who's Captain America and Superman. Basically, the Super Soldier serum takes Kryptonian DNA, and there's Ultra Metallo, where they build a Nazi Metallo, and Lex Luthor injects himself with these alien cells too, and he turns into the Green Skull-esque type person. One of the weirder ones is Lobo the Duck, Generation Hex, Challengers of the Fantastic.
That was my favorite.
That's one I'm probably going to read after the show, because the more I read these books, yes, they are 90s as fuck, but damn if they are not entertaining. Can you imagine what you could do now with the artists that are out now, with the characters where they are? And considering comics are a big business now, they are booming again. And we need something to get people in the stores right now, or to buy more digital, or to buy more brick and mortar. Either way, more comics, people. This is a great way to, I think, boost the industry, because when this happened in the 90s, comics were looking kind of rough for a while.
Yeah. I mean, the main thing of the DC Marvel, like, I love the 4 issues, like, issue 1 and issue 3 was Marvel versus DC on the cover, and 2 and 4 was DC versus Marvel. Like they flip back and forth. This is also the second time, folks, that in accordance with a cosmic next level event where changes are happening, they had a phone line you could call in to vote on who would win a particular fight, like Superman versus Hulk, Shazam, Captain Marvel versus Thor, such like that. And they really hadn't done a phone line like this since the death of Jason Todd years before, and Death in the... And
now,
sorry, go Mike.
No, I was about to say no. Finish your thought, because there's something that just came to light within the last little while about this.
So yeah, and I mean, this is one of the first times that I wanted to call it, but it was literally a 1-900 number. I was like, hey, Mom, I'm going to call this. I want to vote in this fight, Superman versus... She's like, I don't think so, Jonathan. We're not paying for that call. And yeah, I mean, the combinations are done. Like I said, Challengers are fantastic. It's a Fantastic Four by way of Challengers of the Unknown. The other one I love is Spider-Boy, which is Spider-Man mixed with the Connor Kent, like Superboy that came out of Death of Superman. And
that book was surprisingly entertaining.
Yeah, and it's not the least of which was because of Mike Wieringo's art. I think I'm pronouncing that right. He just had this very natural animated look to his art. I mean, and they set up so many storylines. Like Spider-Boy works for like the Cadmus Project, and one of his mentors is Dr. Octavius, Dr. Octopus, but he's not insane or a villain. But Reed Richards is, because he's been infected by evil DNA due to Dr. Sidney. I've heard he's one of the psycho mad scientists that Superman fought in the 90s. One of the ones I thought I was really intrigued by, because I've always loved the concept of the Metalman. Like Dr. Will Magnus creates the responsometer and puts in this molten gold, and it forms into this superheroic android who has all the best qualities of gold, and that's his personality. So, of course, they mashed that with Magneto. So you have Magneto and the Magnetic Men and such like that. Overall, this is peanut butter and chocolate plus. Like, there was not one of these mashups I didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They're all entertaining, and they all take place in the fictional amalgam universe where they talk about issues that never happened. So when you go back to the back of the book, where normally you get letters to the editor, they're like, oh yeah, this happened in Tales of the Fantastic Suspense, issue number 56, or this happened in Spider-Boy and His Astonishing Friends, stuff like that. They'll talk about all these fictional things that never happened, or characters that you don't know exist. And they play it completely straight. And I thought that was an amazing strength to this. And I would love to see a revisit to this. I wish they'd focused a little bit less on the brothers fighting, because it was fucking lame, because each fight between people was only like maybe 1 or 2 pages. Now, the thing I was talking about, I saw this on Twitter pop up recently. They drew alternate outcomes to the fights. So, and they've only ever released one publicly. And the one that was released publicly, it was penciled, but it was never inked, was Superman versus the Hulk. So there's one where the Hulk kicks the shit out of Superman. And I thought that was really, really neat. And that's something I wish DC or Marvel would release as just, hey guys, you've been fans for 50 years. Merry Christmas. Here's something cool.
I call bullshit on that outcome, because the Hulk, specifically the Hulk that Superman was fighting. Now we're talking post Return of Superman, super mulleted Superman versus the smart Hulk, the Green Hulk body, Gray Hulk attitude, Bruce Banner in control. And he wasn't nearly as strong as, like, say, the Incredible, like the original Savage Incredible Hulk. So that's just my nitpicky nerd gripe about that. There's no way the Hulk would have won that.
Yeah, no. Superman can destroy solar systems, so no. And then very, very, very briefly, one other comic that I read in prep for this. This one took me by surprise, and it was Transformers versus Visionaries. Visionaries was a very weird 80s cartoon show where basically knights of the mystical light, and there were spectral knights and darkling lords. Basically, magic and tech technology. And basically, the Visionaries had come to Cybertron as refugees from their planet because bad things happen. So there's this bad guy named Merklin who stirs up the Visionaries. There's this bad Darkling Lord named Virulina. I can't even pronounce her name. Virulina, and she's like, I'm going to lead these people and fuck Lorik, the Spectral Knight Visionary. And eventually a lot of the good Visionaries turn on him because they're like, guys, we don't want to die here. And they outright murder Cup. Like, they rust him to death because they find out their magic works on Cybertronians. Yeah, they behead him, straight up kill him.
Yeah, and it's like watching Ironhide die in my possibly least favorite of the trend. Like, Cup, yeah, he basically gets cosmic rusted to death. Now, brief bit of back hit story for this. Now, IDW, I love IDW's Transformers run start to finish. Like, I really have no complaints. Well, I have a couple of complaints, but they don't matter here. But this was about a year or so into the point where they started to suck in my mind a little bit, because they had previously kept the Transformers and G.I. Joe continuities that they were writing as separate worlds unto themselves. But then they started getting all the Hasbro licenses, Micronauts and ROM Space Knight and Action Man and Mask. And so they, at this point, they had become a shared universe amongst all these properties. Like, Mask is now an offshoot of G.I. Joe, and the ROM Space Knight, has fought the Transformers, thousands of years in the past during the Cybertronian Civil War. And I forget exactly what happened, but basically the beginning of this thing, the Visionaries are here, and Merklin had been a villain in the Transformers comics for a couple of years prior, although you didn't know it at the time. But it basically says, yeah, this happened, and now the Visionaries are here, but it essentially happened off screen. So you don't know exactly. It's just, yeah, the Visionaries are here, and they've got a refuge on Cyber. It just kind of annoyed me. It's like, I want to see what happened.
The thing that took me by surprise is it wasn't even so much a Transformer story. It was more a Visionary story than it was anything. And I don't know anything about Visionaries. I've seen maybe 1 or 2 episodes of the show. I remember the theme song and the toys more than I do anything else about the kind of property. And they kill a lot of Transformers. They kill Six Changer. They kill Cup. They kill a few other ones. They turn Waspinator into like a flying chariot, which is kind of cool. And it was just really, really well done. And then the book ends with a part of Cybertron becoming lush jungle and farmable land, and the Visionaries stay on Cybertron alongside the Cybertronians, and they literally leaned on the Bono, whatever, Greek Ninibong thing.
Minimon or whatever.
Yeah, it shows up 3 times in the book, and they're totally playing it straight. And it's just, I thought the artwork was really, really well done, and the colors pop. Oh my god, they pop.
No, I like the Visionaries cartoon, folks. If you have never heard of this, is essentially on a planet with 3 suns. There's a once in a lifetime. The suns all line up and cause all technology to stop working, stone dead on the planet. And give or take, like 100 years later, they've just reverted to feudalism, and now it's like literally like there's no technology still there, but only certain magic users can activate it. It was really weird. And the Visionaries, I agree with you, Mike. Their designs are great. They got this whole techno feudal look to their armor. They got like the facial Tron line tattoos, which I thought were kind of intriguing. And as much as there are Darkling Lords and Spectral Knights, they're not wholly separate groups. It's more just a tribal thing, but they are essentially all working together to survive. And yeah, and sorry, brain fart. One of the things that came out of this is this setup. This miniseries is one of the steps on the end of the first IDW run of Transformers. They still have the license. They've since started a comic in a new continuity, but this sets up Transformers Unicron, and the Chaos Bringer is coming, and it's because of events in this book that the ball really starts rolling.
That's really neat.
Yeah, no, and the way they set up Unicron and like the whole mythology and lore of the Transformers in these is something well worth getting into. but it is a bit of a slog, folks, because they've been doing this since 2005, and it only ended like a couple of years ago. So good luck. But no, I love this. When I heard they were bringing Visionaries in, I was all in because I had a bunch of those toys when I was a kid. I loved the cartoon. I was like, okay, how is Leoric and Optimus Prime going to function? You know, what is Darkstorm, who is the leader of the Darkling Lords? He was killed off screen before this series started. So you have, you know, Virulina is the leader now, and there's Witterquick and Cryotech. They all have like these really awesome moves. Like you hear Cryotech and you would think he has ice powers. No, he just turns into a giant glowing grizzly bear. Because he's a bear avatar like that. Did you ever hear about this, Alex, or look into it at all?
It was one of those things where I might have seen. I know the show didn't last long, right?
One season,
like 13 episodes.
Get like a bunch of video compilations that would have shown up at Rogers Video.
Maybe.
I think there was. I think it's the first 3 or 4 episodes where, and this is something that, you know, a lot of cartoons in the 80s were done, where they edit the first 3 or 4 episodes into Visionaries, the movie.
I think that might have been. We used to go, and there was always the 99-cent kids movies, right? You could get it for a week. So we would rent on the weekend. You know, my parents would go, okay, you have $4 to spend on whatever you want. That meant 1 new release, or it could mean 4 of these tapes. So I think I rented that along with, was it Trolls or something? Who did the Rock Lords?
That was the same people who did the GoBots people.
I think that was Hasbro, and I want to say Ruby Spears.
Okay.
Or Hanna-Barbera. No, it was Hanna-Barbera.
I distinctly remember a weekend having a tape of that, Visionaries. What was the one? I had a toy of it that I got at a garage sale, but there was a compilation tape. What was the show where it was like the toys were like, they looked like big chunky action figures, like of like way over thick dudes, almost looked like pro wrestlers, but they were like, one guy's like a police officer, one guy's something else, but then you'd break them open and there'd be a robot inside.
Oh no, that's like
the Pretenders.
Yeah, that's like Transformers Pretenders.
I don't think it was Pretenders. It was like the show had like humans, but then they had robots on the inside. There was a show, I think, that was that, like, I'm not having, maybe it's a fever dream, but it was that as well.
I was going to say Rescue Heroes for a moment there, but I was like, robots on the inside. It's like, that's. Dude.
I'll look it up, and we'll have to talk about it after air. Or I'll have to find it because I have the vision in my brain. And then there was Visionaries, that, and there was another tape that I rented around the same time, like maybe in the same weekend, and that one was, I know I rented a Spiral Zone one time, and it was either Spiral Zone or.
It's had a badass theme song, by the way.
Yeah. Or it was a compilation tape of like, was it Bionic 6 or something? I was on a kick for trying to get all these things because my go-to at the rental store, like, that was, I would find whatever they had at either the Jumbo Video or at the Rogers here. But when I would visit my grandparents in Scarborough, we would go to Blockbuster, which was always more money. It was always like 50 cents or $1 more than every other rental store. So there, it might have been one of the ones I rented there as well. But my go-tos were these 2 tapes. One of was it Vanguard Ace, 70s anime, and one was Transor Z, which that was the Americanization of Mazinger Z. And so I would rent, like, when I would visit them, I'd rent all my robot, team up Voltron type shows. But it might have been one that I rented there because I know for sure I saw this show, but it was not on TV. It was definitely on a VHS tape.
Yeah.
Because I know that you could go, like, the standard kids would do, like, you'd always go to the store and you'd rent, like, all the Turtles compilations because there's probably too many to count of all the Turtles cartoons where they're like, here's 3 episodes on this theme on one tape. Because that's something that younger people wouldn't even, know about, that, most TV shows for kids were not released on seasons. They were released in themed VHS tapes of, like, here's 3 episodes of the Turtles where they were at the beach.
Yeah.
or something to that extent. I have vague memories of this when I was like 4 or 5, renting this, because I know, I looked at the art right now, I know it, but I don't know. I know for sure it wasn't that I saw it on TV.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I'm vaguely familiar.
Yeah, no, I love the cartoon. Like Mike said, this had like a badass theme song, short, sweet, to the point. I love the character of Merkle show. An actor, because I knew his voice before I knew his face, was Roscoe Lee Brown. A lot of our listeners might know him as the voice of Kingpin in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon.
He's one of the more distinctive character actors from his era, from the 70s and 80s.
Because wasn't he also like the voice of Megabyte in Reboot? I might be thinking of a different voice.
Nope, that was was it Jay something or other? He died years ago.
Because it was either him or Roscoe, like the
Tony,
voice of
Tony J, I think, that did the voice of Megabyte.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think it was Tony J as the voice of Merklin. Who his home was at the top of Mount Iron, or Iron Mountain, is basically the one play set you got in this toy line. And the whole setup of the show, get back to the comics a sec, was he convinces these knights to travel up this booby trap, Raiders of the Lost Temple of Doom, to the top, and they get their mystic superpowers. And he's just such an asshole because he literally flushes them down a giant toilet, or at least that's the sound effect. I mean, I love this show too. It was so much fun when it's like Transformers, like, hell yes, let's go. It's like G.I. Joe Transformers, which we'll talk about shortly. So I guess back to you to finish.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I thought it was neat. So I guess, JT, round us out and bring us home, brother.
Okay, well, the first one, like I said, one of my favorite crossovers that I read as a kid, and I got the ones I'm talking about are the newer crossovers, G.I. Joe versus Transformers. There is the original 4-issue crossover from the 80s, which actually features cameo from the black and white symbiote-suited Spider-Man, and is written as if the Transformers and the G.I. Joe are happening in the same world as the X-Men and the Avengers, which was just kind of how it happened back then. And that's one of my favorite things about... I love the comic crossovers where, the Incredible Hulk runs into Batman in Gotham City when Bruce Banner's on the run, and it's not some cosmic storm blew the Hulk into DC Universe. It's just, they're in the same world. Have fun, kids. So the first G.I. Joe Transformers crossover happened in the early aughts, starting, I think it was around 2005, at a time when the huge 80s nostalgia boom was coming back. Like, you're getting reboots of all these cartoons, you're getting new toys, you're getting comics. Now, the G.I. Joe crossover opens with Cobra digging up the Ark and then reconfiguring the various Transformers and Decepticons into, like, Trouble Bubbles and Rattlers and Night Ravens and Hiss Tanks. And then Wheeljack and Bumblebee have managed to escape, and they team up with the Joes to stop Cobra from taking over the world with these fantastic technological creations of theirs. And it leads actually into it's a series of crossovers. You get this, we get part 2 where Cobra tries to hack into Vector Sigma on Cybertron and sends a bunch of Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Cobras to various time periods. In one of the promo art images, it never showed up in the story, and I wish it had. They go back to the 70s, and Jazz gets turned into a pimped out Cadillac. Now, you might have misunderstood what I said. Everyone's favorite Transformer gets turned into a pimp mobile.
And Michael Bay was not involved.
No, this was, just prior to the first film. Michael Bay can stay the F away from my Transformers, you son of a bitch. And the third one, third one, looking at the list here, was...
I remember the Devil's Due Transformers G.I. Joe crossover being really good, too.
This was the first one. The first one was Devil's Due when it was still kind of an imprint studio of Image Comics. Because the first G.I. Joe, new G.I. Joe comics had the Image I stamp. And this was a 3-way of sorts between Image, Devil's Due, and Dreamwave, who at the time still had the license for Transformers. So it hadn't lapsed yet. IDW had yet to pick it. But you had the other crossovers. There was the next one where you find out that the American government had kind of not told the Transformers the truth, and they were trying to build their own AI, which is called the Serpent OR. Spell it out. Sound it out. So basically, the American, they turned Serpentor into a android who's got like the mind of Megatron, and he wants the Matrix of leadership. And it basically ends up with General Hawk becoming like he absorbs the power of the Matrix, which leads into the final crossover, which was only a one shot, where you meet Cobra Law, and it turns out, as much as Cobra Commander worshipped Cobra Law was worshiping the Chaos Bringer Unicron. And they team up with the original G.I. Joe from the 12-inch toy line in the 70s. These crossovers are batshit insane. Them. And did you guys, I know I shared the first crossover with you. Did you guys have a chance to read that for today?
I've read them before in the past, but it's been a number of years.
I got part way through, and then Alex fell asleep while taking a nap. Well, I guess
that's okay, Alex.
To take a nap. Not that there was anything wrong with it. It's just Alex was very content, and then went, "Okay, I'll get back to this later." And then it was time to record.
Yeah, no, and I mean they have so many different loving homages to different bits of Transformers and G.I. Joe lore in here. One of my favorites is they origin of Snake Eyes into this story. Like when you first see the G.I. Joe, the Joes, they haven't officially become G.I. Joe yet. They're still just plain old grease shirts in this man's military. And Snake Eyes doesn't talk because he made a bet with all the other guys in this platoon that he wouldn't say anything for the duration of this mission they're on. And he gets blasted by one of the, I think it's actually Optimus Prime in his tank mode, blasts the troop carrier they're on. Snake Eyes takes it full in the face, and that's how he gets all scarred up and fugly, and why he wears the black suit. Now, part of the Snake Eyes origin is before he gets scarred in the G.I. Joe comics, his family died on their way to pick him up when he was coming home from Vietnam. So, he's already got that heavy burden on him. So all in one day, he's scarred up. He can't talk anymore. He loses his family. Giant robots are invading. Love how they wove that in. Now,
sure.
Why not? Now, something we talked about, our first episode was trading on the Power Rangers, specifically the Shattered Grid story. My next crossover comes out of this era of Power Rangers, and that is 27 crossover Justice League Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, where Dr. Zed, Lord Zed and Zack, through shenanigans, are cast into the DC universe, and you get the requisite two heroes meet and they fight. So you have the Power Rangers fighting the Justice League, which lasts a bit longer than you would think because the Rangers actually put up a decent fight. And then Lord Zed teams up with Brainiac to conquer both their worlds. And, at one point, the Megazords are taken over by Brainiac, so the Rangers have to gear up, and they use a bunch of trophies from the Justice League trophy room. Jason gets the sword of Azrael and the helmet of the Red Hood. Kimberly gets the boxing glove and other arrows of Green Arrow and his bow.
Oh my god.
It is glorious. And one of the best images in this thing is at one point Alpha has been sucked into the DC universe. He's got one of those orbs that Lord Zed would throw down from the moon to make his monster grow. And he's like, give it to me. You cannot survive our encounter. And there's this giant monster that's, beaten the heroes. So what does Alpha do? He turns himself into a kaiju and punches the monster the fuck out. It's like, I just punched you out, bitch. It gives me the warm and fuzzies just thinking about it. And they end with this incredible tease for, I hope they do another crossover and follow up on this. You see in the last panel, it's an inner monologue on Alpha, and he's like, I am Brainiac. And you see the little 3-circle triangle, vaguely triangular symbol of Brainiac in his visor. which means Brainiac downloaded himself into Alpha's memory before they went back to their separate universes. I want this to happen again so much. I mean, Batman's, even one point, Batman's like, cool toys. When he sees the Zords. Like, Cyborg, this is the new 52 Justice League, so Cyborg's part of the league. How much do you guys want to read this now?
More than I did before.
Yeah. See, my thing with crossovers, as long as they're fun, they don't have to be a serious inter-company event crossover, which is definitely a topic for the future for us. It's fun. Like the next one, Batman versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, did either of you guys happen to see the animated film?
I did, actually.
Yeah,
I watched it just
really good.
as lockdown started, and I was genuinely surprised how fun it was and how serious yet not serious it took the source material. It treated it with respect, with a big wink and nod, and I absolutely adored it.
And that film very much follows the plot of this first miniseries, and it's a little too dense to talk about the other two, which track them all down, folks. There's even an animated crossover Batman Turtles. It's Batman the Animated Series by way of the 2012 Nickelodeon Ninja Turtles.
Okay, I'm in.
And it's basically the Joker and Harley run across a Krang who's come to the DC universe, and they go through those triangular portals through Dimension X into the Ninja Turtles universe, and then hilarity ensues. So this first one is the Ninja Turtles. Oh, I should mention this crossover, the first one, can fit into the reading order of the official in-canon series of either character, both the Batman and the Ninja Turtles. Fits a little more easily into the Ninja Turtle. But the Turtles come across dimensions to Batman's Burg because the Shredder is teaming up with Ra's al Ghul to mutate the villains of Arkham Asylum into an army so they can take over the world. So the Joker gets mutated. The Joker gets mutated into a man cobra. Harley Quinn becomes a hyena. Mr. Freeze gets turned into a polar bear. Squee! I'm sorry, I love this so much. Just thinking about it, it's like the Penguin gets mutated. Well, 3 guesses. One of my favorite designs was Bane got mutated into a woolly mammoth or an elephant man. Like, how have you not made this into a collectible toy series or a figurine or something? And there are stakes involved here besides, the villains succeeding in, because they cross dimensional lines, that energy is breaking down the mutagen in this turtle system. And if they don't get back to their home universe within a certain frame, they're going to revert to their original form. So, like, the Turtles and Splinter run the risk of becoming ordinary animals again. And at one point, they cross that crisis line. They choose to sacrifice themselves to help Batman stop the villain's schemes. How could this not work?
Like, it's much more intriguing than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, it's the problem with a lot of these crossovers. I think the reason a lot of people crossovers, they're like, well, that's stupid. It's like Star Trek and Doctor Who. I mean, admittedly, that one was great, but you can't be a big fan one way or the other to want to read that. But who doesn't love Batman? Who doesn't love the Ninja?
Exactly. Pretty much. I fully agree. Oh, it finally came to me. I remembered what that other show was that I was talking about. I was a little bit wrong because as I was remembering it with the robot people thing, the show was Centurions.
Oh yeah, I used to have some of these toys.
Because
I wanted those so bad. Kid.
I was thinking it over in my head. I had a few from a garage sale. It wasn't that they were robots; it's everybody else was turned into robots, and they get robotic suits.
Yeah, like the main villains were full-on cyborgs, and the Centurions. Basically, it's what if a Gundam swallowed a G.I. Joe?
Yeah, and the reason, just while we were talking and thinking about it, it came back to me. This was one of those ones where I didn't know it was a long-running show, but it had a 5-part miniseries at the beginning to start off the entire program. That's the tape I saw.
Okay.
So you were right. Yeah, there were so many of these shows that would put 5 parts or 3 parts, and they cut it into one, because it was going to sear a hole into my brain until I figured out what it was. I was like, I did not make this up. This show existed.
I'm going to get you out, damn Splinter. See if I don't.
Well, it's one of those things where it burrows into your head, and you're like, wait a minute. Yeah. It's like how many people thought that there was more than one season's worth of My Pet Monster? It's like, no. And they just aired those 13 episodes incessantly for 10 years straight.
So, I mean, Batman Ninja Turtles, I is an absolute, like the Punisher, Spider-Man, absolute recommend.
It's a no-brainer based on, it's 2 of the most popular ninja properties of all time. You know, say what you will, it's like Batman's the greatest detective. No, he's a ninja. He's always been a ninja, and have him face up against a team of ninjas or crossover and team up with ninjas. It's a no-brainer. Like, it would be like if they really wanted to let the Ninja Turtles, spread their wings and fly, put them with Deadpool. Imagine that.
Oh dear. I do not want Wade Wilson corrupting my Michelangelo, sir.
How about
but it could be entertaining.
Just him and Raph, back to back doing stuff.
I can see that. Now, to close up this one, I got 2 more. I'll go over them real quick. The one thing that works the best about the animated of this crossover is it, like I said, it's that they're in the same world and they don't make a big stink about it. Like, Batman had heard about the Foot Clan in whispers of rumors, and the Ninja Turtles, like Donatello, had heard the urban legend of the Bat of Gotham, and it just run with it.
And the humor was on point.
Oh yeah, like Michelangelo, press some buttons. And Michelangelo, like, joygasms and hits every possible switch in the Batmobile. You see Damian Robin across, like, I always wanted to push the buttons. And he's all bummed out. And also, I've read rumors, and it's only rumors at this point, they ended on an incredible tease for a sequel film where the final fight in the end of the movie is in the Ace Chemical Factory. And guess what chrome-plated kitchen utensil takes a dip in the green tank? The Joker, I mean, the Shredder gets Jokerized, and it's kind of a nod to the third crossover, like Batman Ninja Turtles crossover, where Krang, through shenanigans, creates a Crisis on Infinite Earths and melds DC and Ninja Turtles together. So the Joker is now the laughing man of the leader of the Laughing Ninja Clan, and they all have like ninja masks that look like big Joker sneers. So much fun. The last 2 I've got, real quick, He-Man Thundercats from 2016. This literally Skeletor and Mum-Ra team up because the ancient spirits of evil cut a deal with Skeletor because Mum-Ra has fucked up one too many times. And it basically involves them coming together and to get mixed together as Mumator.
Interesting.
The big villain. Prince Adam is killed but gets better in the course of one issue in this series. And Cringer gets turned into a He-Man character at one point. Like, he doesn't get turned into Battle... Well, he gets turned into Battle Cat, but he becomes like a bipedal, roided out, like Macho Man Randy Savage levels of awesomeness He-Man character, and lays waste to the mutants and the various He-Man villains who are trying to loot Mum-Ra's pyramid at the time.
That's one thing. You were like thinking of crossovers that would work with it. How cool would it have been to have, like, back in the day, like a Hulk Hogan's Rock and Roll Wrestling and He-Man crossover?
Glorious. And
it would have been brilliant. But yeah, like this, I keep thinking in my head, like Turtles mixes with so many good things, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do another film, because they had said, I want to find the article, but that it was the most successful of their direct-to-video movies in years.
Yeah, and they just closed up their DC animated universe with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War.
I still have to watch what Birdman did and said he loved it.
It's good.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
I've been reading some articles where a lot of critics are saying this is Endgame done right, which is high praise. Now, this miniseries leads into another miniseries, which I think we could do another round of crossovers in the future, where the world of Injustice Gods Among Us crosses over with He-Man, and that crossover is in canon with this one. But the Injustice version they cross over with is the bad ending, because you know how they have the multiple endings in the last Injustice game? Is this, they cross over with the ending where Superman wins and turns Batman into like a server for Brainiac at the end. So Damian has become Batman, and they've all teamed up to stop the regime, and they get mixed up with, you know, He-Man. He-Man's had a lot of crossovers through the years. One of my first He-Man comics was an issue of DC Presents back in the day where Skeletor kidnaps Superman and brings him to Eternia so he can defeat He-Man in battle and he can take over Captain Grayskull.
One of my first comic books ever was a He-Man comic I got in an Easter basket. I want to say in 1986 or 87.
Yeah.
I wish I still had it just because that'd be a nice little piece of my childhood, though, because I remember the cover, but I don't remember too much more beyond that.
My last crossover, it's of the ones I've spoken about today, it is my favorite crossover. It's in my top favorite time. Batman versus Predator.
I had no idea that existed.
Oh, yeah.
I did, but I've never read it.
Oh, see, this comic, besides getting me into the biggest thing that I got out of this, besides one of my favorite crossovers of all time, is my lifelong love of Andy and Adam Kubert, the sons of legendary artist Joe Kubert, who did the art and inking on this comic. And basically it is it's the Predator has come to Gotham City. He starts doing his thing. Batman, in addition to trying to prevent a gang war between these two feuding gangsters, he has to deal with how do you pronounce the Predator's species name, Mike?
Yacha.
Yacha. He has to deal with this Yacha hunter who is doing what they do. And there's a point in the book where the Predator fucks Batman up that he's out of commission for like a month, and people start wondering whether Batman's dead or if he's a coward. And when he comes back after he heals up, he basically created one of the first alternate suits I ever saw. Like, you know how in the Batman animated series toy line, he had like a billion different like backup suits, like Mountain Climber Batman and Firefighter Batman and such like that. He creates a sonar suit that lets him track and armor him up enough to face the Predator one-on-one. And he eventually he beats the Predator down, and the Predator doesn't die trying to attack Batman. He creates what amounts to ritual Predator seppuku. Like a bunch of his family, his tribe show up. They hand him a sword, which looks like this awesome looking scimitar. He says one of the phrases that the Predator, you know how they copy a phrase and like play it back, but it sounds all creepy. Something from one of his victims. He skewers himself in the middle. The elder Predator pulls the sword out, gives it to Batman, and they take off like in Predator 2. And it ends with
you were better than him. We respect you. Goodbye.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like sitting there and Batman's like kind of handling and looking at Alfred comes. Are you all right, sir? Will we see them again? No, we won't, Alfred. Not after they know what lives here. Which is by far one of the most badass Batman lines ever. And
no point hunting on that planet. No, thank you.
And that's the thing that disappoints me about this just a little bit, because there are 2 sequels. They're worth it if you have that curiosity. The second one, basically Batman teams up with the Huntress, and this is before she got the one-piece jumpsuit that Jim Lee created in Hush. This is back where she's still wearing the bathing suit with the plunging neckline Huntress. And yeah, it's basically this Predator that's kind of slightly nuts, and they take it out. And then the third one, Blood Ties, a father and son Predator duo come to Gotham City, and they start hunting Batman and Tim Drake Rob. And they're all entertaining as crossovers are. It's just, I feel it kind of cheap, that line at the end of this one. It's like, they will never be back. Way to prove Batman wrong, assholes.
Is it the same Earth?
No, it's the same. They're all in continuity.
So they're all. It's not like this is taking place on like an Earth 2 or something.
No, this is Earth 1, Earth Prime, Batman, and all these miniseries. But it's written to be that, but it's that you can consider it canon. It's not expressly canon. But yeah, it's Batman gets fucked up by the Predator, and in turn, Predator up. And at one point, Alfred's facing down the Predator with a shotgun. Alfred ain't giving him like an inch, like he's about to take one on the chin for Master Wayne. And then Batman flies out of the side and tackles the Predator away.
Now, have you seen the Batman short film called Dead End, where he fights the Predator and the alien?
Have seen it, but I haven't seen it for years.
I just watched it the other day.
Fan-made project or official?
It was a fan-made project, and it turns out one of the people who in it was Walter Koenig's son, Andrew, who's unfortunately passed away. He played the Joker in that. I was like, what the fuck? But yeah, it's Batman fighting the alien and the Predator, and it's fucking intense. It's like 5 minutes long, but it's really good. I think it was done as a proof of like concept, but it was neat. I think Watch Mojo included it on one of their top best fan films. There was this.
Sorry, you're saying Watch Mojo included it in something they stole from another website and they just said it was theirs, like they do for every video?
Yes. But yeah, they did that. There was like a Terminator one. There was the Punisher Dirty Laundry, which was the Thomas Jane Punisher short film.
That was the famous one where people were like, why don't they get him to do another Punisher?
Mind you, I do like. What was the other guy? It was Ray something. Ray
Stevenson.
Yeah, that one I liked because it was so ridiculous. And a friend of mine wrote that movie. Oh,
really? The Warzone had two parts that were worth watching over and over and over again. One, when he blows up
the rocket launcher,
the Jamaican parkour guy with the rocket launcher while he's mid jump.
Yes.
And two, when they've come and threatened the one family, and Frank shows up, and the cop partner, his ex partner's there. And they're like, he comes in with a shotgun and he points it at the bad guy, and the bad guy's threatening him. He picks up the child, starts to slowly walk away, and the partner goes, all right, Frank, I'm going to call this in. You get out of here, blah, blah. And he just very slowly pulls up the shotgun and blasts the guy's head off in front of the partner. God damn it, Frank, what the fuck? And he just walks away with the kid very slowly. The kid doesn't even flinch. But
I didn't even think that's what I thought you were going to talk about, where he walks in and there's that skinny, weaselly looking coke addict that's part of Jigsaw's crew, and he apparently cocaine like dries out the human anatomy somewhat, because when he punches the Punisher's fist goes through this guy's head like it was a wet paper bag.
Yeah, no, it's the shotgun one that gets me, and also quite possibly, to this day, the best R-rated opening to any superhero movie ever. Like, as cool as Logan was with the opening scene where he's like, they're fucking up his limousine. He walks in and murders an entire crime family. He basically gets his revenge that he's always wanted in the first 2 minutes.
I don't even think that was revenge. I think that was just...
That was the second crime family he was going after.
Yeah.
And he just shows up, gets in there, chops off a bunch of people's heads, and then murders the whole family from grandparents to grandkids.
Yeah. I love that scene. I mean, that's straight out of Batman Year One. That kind of the way it's shot and the way it's set up, it just reminded me of that so much. I love how that movie ended, where, you find out Detective Soap is like his inside man in the NYPD, the guy in charge of the Punisher Task Force. He is the Punisher Task Force, and they're walking in front of this church, and there's the sign that says Jesus save on the cross, and Soap keeps walking, Punisher up, walking a while ago, and this guy comes up to steal him, and then you see this at the top of the stairs, the Punisher is back, and the light starts to dim and Jesus burns out, and it's like, you see the skull glowing, and it's like Punisher saves, blows the guy's head off. Ah, damn it, Frank, now I got brains all over me.
Yeah. Like, I mean, as cool, like that was, it doesn't get enough credit. But the first movie that they did with Thomas Jane, I think the only two scenes people really remember is how amazing the scene with Kevin Nash was when they're fighting through the whole apartment, and it's got the right amount of levity, the right amount of practical effects. That and the part when he does the siege at the very end, and the part where he sticks the knife to the bottom of the guy's mouth and he opens his mouth, you can see the blade all the way going up to his brain.
And then he stabs him
which for the time, at least in Canada, that was a 14A movie. It wasn't rated R. It was like surprising as hell when I saw it in theaters, because I was, what year did that come out?
2004, 2004, maybe 2005.
So I'm like, at that point, 2004, I'm like 17, 16. And I'm like, I was not expecting that. And then Punisher Warzone comes out, and of course, it's like it's so bloody, it's so over the top. There's nothing in that movie that if you release that right now, people would be like, oh, it's cool like Deadpool. It was just wrong timing, I think.
My favorite bit in that final assault scene is where you see the scumbag brother of the man the Punisher killed in the first 10 minutes of the film. Granted, somebody else pulled the trigger. But he's like, you look like a strong kid. You know anything about isometrics? And he puts that anti-personnel mine in his hand and ties the trip wire to the thing. And there's only so long you keep your arm extended like that. And he just looks like a hell of a workout. And then he goes downstairs and John... Sorry?
That's a very, almost like an homage to Mad Max. Like the original Mad Max.
Oh, yeah, that is straight up Mad Max. And he goes downstairs to fight Tron Travolta. You killed my son! Boom. Both of them.
And I mean, it does have the cheesy ending though, where he gets dragged through all the, the burning area, and it makes the skull. Like he planned to do that.
And so I mean, I think we've pretty much gotten to the end of our crossovers here. Although certainly there are so many crossovers, we are well prepared for another one of these episodes down the line. Yeah. There's a certain horror themed crossover that I was going to bring here, but we would have just ended up talking about it for the whole show.
Do you want to take a minute? Do you want to take a minute and say like one crossover that doesn't exist that you would love to see? I've got one, which is I would love an X-Files Supernatural crossover.
You have no idea how much I want that in my life now, Alex.
And I wanted to say it before Mike would say it too.
I'm thinking here. Come back to me in just a minute.
Aren't you waiting? Isn't there the Ponies one coming out soon? That one's actually a reality.
Oh yeah. There's Ponies versus Transformers, which will be, I think, coming out in November of this year. Though I wonder if it'll get pushed because of Corona.
I thought there was Ponies Power Rangers.
There's a toy for that. There's also Ponies Ghostbusters and Ponies D&D as well. I'm thinking here. I want to do something a little bit outside of the box. Actually, you know what I'd like to see? Ghostbusters Hellboy.
That would be interesting.
I think that'd be interesting because you'd get the BRPD and the Ghostbusters working together. And I didn't even talk about any of the Ghostbusters crossovers, which I read in prep for this too. So that was a wonderful series of crossovers. But anyway, so Alex is going to be picking the next one, Mike, though I think you've got
a crossover for me that doesn't exist yet. Transformers Power
Rangers?
It would not surprise me if we see Power Rangers Transformers toys as a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive to judge interest, and then they'll do something with it.
I want to see the Megazord fight Devastator.
Or have Power Master Optimus Prime, but his arm and leg armor is like the Zords.
Sure.
Or maybe have the Power Rangers drive Optimus Prime. So there could be so many interesting possibilities here.
Yeah, it's the idea of it just makes me go, oh yeah.
So now typically what we do here on the show is each of us picks the following month's topic. I pick Power Rangers for the first one. JT picked crossover comics, which means it now falls to Alex, the producer, to pick next month's topic.
I'm going to go with something that I actually owned and collected. Let's go with the Valiant comic universe. We can do a little bit of, it might be a little different than this one, where I'll pick a few things for us to check out. Also, we can go a little over the history of them and how they went from being a startup that at one point was outselling the majors to being destroyed by a video game company. to then
rising like the Phoenix years later.
Yes, rising like the Phoenix to become one of the strongest independent ones again, and securing multi-media franchise deals with major companies, and sort of found their spot. Like in little time, they've come to prominence higher than most of their competitors by having a very strong independent universe from anybody else. So that'll be interesting. The first, in as far as what people now would have known them for, when we were younger, most people knew X-O Manowar because there was the crossovers with Iron Man. And then in today's day and age, you'll probably know Valiant more from anything from the Bloodshot movie that just came out, which is supposed to be the first of a many multi-picture deal with Sony Pictures. So that'll be interesting because I believe it's a world and universe and comic series that most people don't know exist.
There's a wealth of potential there to be certain.
And then I think after that, because it would fall to me in the rotation, I'm debating between Hellboy and Mike Mignola, because I've always been remarkably curious, and I've only ever read like volume 1 of Hellboy and the files of the BRPD, but I know there's a lot to his mythology. I've also seen the like animated specials and the movie.
I doubt we're going to be able to read all of it because my old roommate had those books, and they are thick when you want to get every volume.
Yeah, so that may be something, or I could talk about the old Dark Horse Legends Star Wars stuff. Like, I'd love to talk about Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, which kind of laid a lot of the foundation for Knights of the Old Republic. So maybe, plus there's just a wealth of Star Wars books out there. I don't know, I haven't decided yet. You'll find out next month. So anyway, for this edition of TWIG Sunday Funnies, we have been
JT from Saskatoon,
Alex the producer,
I've been Mike the Birdman Dodd, saying my friend Jackie Bam Bam might say, be cool, be kind, be careful, and we'll see you in the funny pages next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
Well, that's our show. All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at ThisWeekInGeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at ThisWeekInGeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekInGeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.